Right now, it's time for the Media Beat with David Tereshchuk. David joins us on a Friday morning, and we take a look at the media coverage of stories at home and around the world. David has his own website, which is themediabeat.us. He's also a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief. And we say good morning. Good morning, David.
Well, hello. I'm very glad to be reporting in again from the media capital of the world, New York City, my usual base, and chatting with that firmly probing question of Marshall Miles once again. Yes, it's Friday, another week, Marshall.
There's
pretty busy one, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of busy things, but there's something I was going to bring up, and I'll bring it up now. We've been watching the fortunes of Boris Johnson, and what he's going through, I think just for our international look, turn our eyes to France, because Marine Le Pen finally has gotten some power that she's been looking for. Her party did extremely well in really denying Macron the ability to do really what he wants to do.
Yeah, well, we've got an interesting situation. It's not quite in formal terms, the cohabitation, which is the French term for when you have a president of one persuasion, representing one party in office with a parliament and an effective government for day-to-day governing of France of a completely different persuasion. But what we have got is something of the pendulum swinging in French politics. You get a fairly decisive result at the presidential level. President Macron managed to beat off the threat from the right, represented by Marine Le Pen, the daughter of the Jean-Marie Le Pen of the earlier generation. A nasty piece of political work, and his daughter is perhaps every bit as disturbing a political leader, but has a little bit more political savvy, I guess. And what's happened as the pendulum swung about in response to that, as I say, a fairly decisive outcome after 2 rounds of the presidential elections earlier in the year. We then had parliamentary elections, which weren't anything so clearly to Macron's benefit. We had a fairly unified left, which is in recent times is a rare occurrence in French politics. But of course, you did also have at the time of the parliamentary elections results coming through. There wasn't a lot of attention paid to the fact that it wasn't just the left who did well against Macron at the parliamentary level, and in some ways, reflective of the mood in the country in a regional sense. But there was also this reassertion of effective power in pockets. But significant pockets registered for Marine Le Pen. And yes, it's not an actual hobbling of the president's power, but it certainly restricts him or kind of limits him in what he would like to do and what he's been known for, of course, in his first term. Is a kind of top-down directorial form of governing, and it looks like he's going to have to change his ways, accommodate to Parliament in general, and even, and this will really stick in his craw, I know, make sure he doesn't offend the freshly assertive supporters of the far right. Not something that he would ever want to do in his first term and never did. And now he's going to have to take them into account in the second term of his. But, I mean, it doesn't change the overall picture, which is that the French have suddenly in terms of how surprising it is in recent French political history, but they've actually given a president a second term. That's not what they have done for a while. So the overall feeling is that the man is worth a second chance, but he's not got an entirely free hand now.
It seems like this uncertainty in the political world, which seemed to blossom in the United States about 6 to 7 years ago, it's a worldwide phenomena where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. Yeah, it really is amazing, and I'm talking about that way with the public being so split.
Sure. The tumultuousness of 2016, in many ways. I mean, Trump in the United States, Brexit in Europe, affecting both sides of that body of water that separates Britain from the rest of the EU, or what is the rest of Europe. Britain, of course, is no longer part of the EU. And the other changes that took place in that time in different parts of the world are all sort of still exerting their effect, and in some ways the developments in the American domestic scene are still showing ways of a payoff being delivered in the tumultuousness. I think there's no other word for it, of the political situation. I mean, the journalistic world here was rocked again this week by the Congressional Committee on January 6th and its additional and dramatic surprise hearing on Tuesday, presenting evidence from that young aide to ex-President Trump's chief of staff, the aide being Cassidy Hutchinson, of course. The media outlets have been offering, their powerful little punchy list of bullet points to take what they call takeaways from Hutchinson's testimony, and it really was another of those gripping pieces of television. The committee hearings are public hearings as opposed to what they've been doing previously. And they certainly carried a powerful impact. But it's interesting, the coverage is starting to arch over two parallel investigations that are going on. And then they're obviously going to converge at some point. I'm talking about the committee on the one hand and the Department of Justice investigating possible crimes committed in the course of all these events. The committee is moving towards the last of its public hearings, and meanwhile the Justice Department is intensifying its investigation. Lots of news coming out about that, and its investigation is moving up the chain of command for the alleged conspiracy to have kept the ex-president in power. And it's interesting if you look at the coverage of both of those two prongs, if you like, of probing going on. The committee, on its side, did not provide transcripts of Hutchinson's deposition ahead of time to the Justice Department, or even tell the department that she would be the center of that so-called surprise hearing. The Attorney General's people had to watch the TV just like the rest of us. The big difference between these two investigative entities, of course, is that the committee's efforts are geared for maximum political effect, while the department, of course, has to gather and marshal evidence that is aimed at achieving airtight convictions of the alleged plotters. And of course, it's a matter of our knowledge of human nature that determines the answer to the question which of these two approaches gets the bigger headlines. Of course, it's the political tumult again that's caused by the public hearings on TV.
Well, the thing I like about what's going on right now is, and you can comment on this, David, is that it appears now that journalists are doing what journalists should do. They are tracking down leads and information and they are coming forth with more stories, and this will lead to more stories that are verified stories that aren't from an unnamed source.
That's right. There's a lot of work going on. I mean, like I say, there are investigators, of course, in both of those official entities, but there are the journalistic investigators as well. And in some ways, they sometimes the media takes the lead in pointing things out, and then you find that the Justice Department's investigators, often it's the FBI on the ground, sometimes it's other entities, but the criminal investigation sometimes lags behind the journalistic one, and sometimes, of course, there's an interesting interplay between the committee's work and the Justice Department's work. The committee to the fore sometimes, and of course there's an understandable caution about what the Justice Department does, because the last thing any self-respecting Justice Department, and it's debatable whether we've had that in recent times. The Trump administration was certainly riddled with the suspicion that Trump was trying to turn the Justice Department into an arm of his own singular power as president. But what's happening now is that the Justice Department, of course, wants to get a hold of whatever it can in terms of credible and substantive evidence, in building a case. But at the same time, it just has to be that much more careful than either the journalists or the committee's investigators to be, showing complete independence and complete objectivity as it proceeds in its investigations. So far, they don't seem to have been putting much of a foot wrong. But of course, you won't believe that if you are reading these stories in places like Fox News. The parroting of the ex-president's own vocabulary is very evident. The Justice Department is being accused of conducting a witch hunt, one of ex-President Trump's favorite phrases. But of course, what we are seeing in reality, I'm sure you can perceive this, is that the Justice Department investigators are being very careful. On the other hand, they're not above making certain gestures to demonstrate their independence, I suppose. Turfing Jeffrey Clark, Trump's choice for a new Attorney General, a placeman, turfing of Jeffrey Clark out of bed in a pre-dawn raid on his house, so he's seen in the street in his pajamas, while the federal agents, seize his various electronic devices, and the same going for the other members of the Trump entourage, having to give up their devices too, and it's clearly a down-to-earth, straightforward criminal investigation that's going on the Justice Department side of things.
It's an interesting time. We look at the Supreme Court, and it's now really set in stone that the transformation, which was the Supreme Court, was always political in the way nominees were put up, but now the Supreme Court is, and it's forever going to be this way now, is political in its nature, with decisions that are made on a political basis, and it will forever be this way from now on. Whoever controls the Supreme Court, that's a really sad, shaking thing.
Well, it's another example of what you were talking about. I think when you look at what has happened in the last 6 years, Although it's been in the making for a lot longer. I mean, all of this has been planned for a long time, and the right, if I can use that broad, sweeping term, have been very organized about this for a long time, and with the tumultuous overturning of expectations in 2016, you've got to surge forward in all of those plans, and now we're at that point where there is very substantial payoff. With the ending, I mean, this is sort of, we can see it in this annual ritual of late June, beginning of July. It happens every year, but this year we've had that media ritual of covering the U.S. Supreme Court's final rulings at the end of the term. I mean, they'll reassemble, of course, in October and start the next term. But this is the time of year when you get this flurry of decisions made by the Supreme Court, and it really has been quite a bang this year. Now that there is this supermajority of conservatives on the bench, achieved, of course, by the Trump administration. Biggest of all, of course, has been the overturning of 50 years of previously so-called settled law. The Roe v. Wade ruling that now it's overturned effectively ends access to abortion in many states. It's a massive upheaval, of course, as you say, and of course that's been reflected in the urgency and the heated nature of all the media coverage. And there have been other illiberal judgments too, and the pileup of these judgments has been so obvious. It's interesting to see that the president has weighed in to attack the court for what he called its outrageous behavior. I'm not sure that, with the possible exception of FDR, I don't think any president has been as hard on a Supreme Court before. And he went so far, President Biden, yesterday, to take a position that he's avoided until now, saying that the Senate filibuster rule that requires legislation to be carried by 60 votes in that chamber needs to be changed so that the right to abortion, to take the most particular instance he's referring to, can now be freshly codified into law. I mean, it's all got that flavor of very, very decided, even to the point of being tumultuous in its ramping up of the political temperature. I mean, as if the case being built against Trump isn't enough. I mean, the scene generally is certainly now being set for the next few months for a really high-temperature political battling as we approach those crucial elections, the national midterms in November.
Now, is it possible for a one-vote majority in the Senate to change the filibuster rules?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. But the only way to do it is to get the votes on your side. I mean, ideally, of course, you need a 60 vote to turn down the existing 60 vote ruling. But it may not work out that way. Again, crystal gazing is not what journalists should do. But all the effort that's being put into the push on the Democrat side now is certainly evidence of people's determination to achieve it by hook or by crook.
Well, I think probably the easiest way they're going to try to do it, and this will change the political landscape forever, is just by appointing 3 more people to the Supreme Court. That's not illegal.
Well, and FDR tried that, and there was such a political outcry that he stepped away from the effort. But I think the political outcry this time around is going to be so vocal on the left side. The outrage that's clearly being felt across a number of issues is coming to the point where I think Biden could actually have quite a steamroller opinion on his side if he tried to press towards something as radical as changing the size of the Supreme Court. In a way, one of the justices themselves has made sure of this ramping up of the stakes. I'm talking, of course, about Clarence Thomas, with his widely aimed intervention in all of this, with a supposedly concurring opinion in the Roe v. Wade case, and supposedly independent, of course, but going further than that judgment, suggesting that other bits of settled law. I think we better stop using that blithe term, settled law. I mean, nothing seems settled now. But suggesting that other parts of what we have had established as rights should be overturned, like those on contraception, same-sex marriage, and same-sex intimate behavior. They're all up for overturning now, according to Thomas. And of course, that's another red flag to the supporters of liberal human rights. Essentially, is the way that the argument is now being cased. These are rights being taken away from American citizens. That is a big red flag to be, blue flag, perhaps we should say, in the American political context for colors. And you can see an enormous head of steam, if I can mix my metaphors, building up between now and November.
And finally, NATO. Putin has finally done something that cannot be undone, and that is the strengthening of the NATO organization, the admission of 2 members, which will be ratified over the next several months or a year or so, and also it's the exact opposite of what his invasion of Ukraine he wanted to achieve.
Yeah, there is a very heavy irony in that. I mean, with Sweden and Finland coming into NATO now and being very welcome, of course, except perhaps on the side of Turkey, in many ways the odd man out in NATO, but Turkey's objections to Sweden and Finland have been overcome. It's not yet clear what Turkey has gotten in terms of its reward for dropping its objections. Its objections to Finland and Sweden were all about those 2 Scandinavian countries supporting elements of the Turkish political scene, the Kurds, who of course have presence in a whole stretch of their home region, which stretches through Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, and they're have been treated by the Erdogan regime in Turkey as terrorists, and because of that support, the Turkish president was against them coming into NATO, because of course every single NATO country, including Turkey, has a veto about new membership. But somehow or other, he's been bought off, if I can be cynical in my terminology. And yes, indeed, we have an expanded NATO, the last thing that Putin wanted. The meeting in Madrid was interesting because of the fact that as a newcomer, Sweden could, I suspect, say some truth that perhaps other people would not want to say out loud. The Swedish foreign minister was making a point that I think all of us are aware of, and it's not being spoken out loud very much, is that the Ukraine war is slipping from its preeminence in people's consciousness because of, and a part of that process, it's hard to know what's cause and what's effect. But the media in the West are not paying as much, just frankly, it has to be said, frankly not paying as much to as much attention to the Ukraine situation, the steadily hardening effort by the Russians to just keep on thumping in the most unacceptable ways, and clearly with attacks like the one on Odessa yesterday on civilian targets, sometimes accidentally, perhaps, but looking more and more all the time like deliberate attacks on civilians, war crimes, in other words, and making further encroachment into Ukraine. But somehow or other, there was so much else going on. The media are not foregrounding it as much as they were for the previous few months of this conflict. And it was good to hear from Madrid, Sweden speaking out and saying we mustn't lose sight of what's going on. It's important to keep the world's attention focused on Putin's aggression and war crimes, and maybe that will be another side effect, or perhaps it might be the main effect of two more countries joining NATO and feeling strongly principled about the reasons why they want to be part of that defensive alliance.
And we can
the threat of Russia being the main thing.
And we can wrap up with the sheer embarrassment of Russian troops having to leave that barren island, which they was at the start of the war was famous for the Ukrainian response, and now even with their superior air power. It's an island that it's too costly to defend, and the Russians had to leave. I mean, that also has to be an embarrassment to the Russian military.
Absolutely. Well, Snake Island is now hugely symbolic in Ukraine. They now even have a postage stamp to commemorate its brave its brave resistance and very clear determination not to be defeated by the Russians. But of course, the Russians did win it. But now, significantly, as you say, the Ukrainians have won it back again. But as President Zelensky was saying only yesterday, it's a very small piece of regaining of territory. It's wonderfully symbolic, and I'm sure it's a great morale booster. But it's not changing the fact that the big behemoth of Russia is still making incursions and grabbing more territory, slowly, but grabbing more, mainly in the east. And that's how the shape of that war is settling into its unwelcome nature right now.
All right, lots going on in the world, and it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon for the media coverage, David.
No, absolutely not. It's all tumultuous. I keep using that word, but yeah, we've got so many fronts on which to keep watching, and we will keep watching, won't we?
We will. David, we'll speak to you next week. Have a good weekend, and happy 4th of July.
Same to you.
David Tereshchuk with the Media Beat. Of course, you can find David at his own website, themediabeat.us. And you can also find him as a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief. And you can find him anytime at robinhoodradio.com. Click on demand. Click on The Media Beat with David Tereshchuk.